After the establishment of the slave narrative, the first African American literary renaissance began taking place. Our elevation must be the result of self-efforts and work of our own hands. These are the words of Martin R. Delaney, who was a Black journalist, physician, and social activist. The 1850s and early 1860s saw the first African American literary renaissance. There were developments in the slave narrative. Also, there were many experiments in fiction, novels, novellas, drama, and the like. In his 1853 novella, The Heroic Slave, Frederick Douglass introduces the protagonist, Madison Washington. Madison Washington, in this novella, led a successful slave mutiny in 1841. And in doing so, he became a model of Black manhood that balanced the violent desire for justice, as seen in Nat Turner, and Christian pacifism demonstrated by Uncle Tom in Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin. Soon after the publication of The Heroic Slave, the first full-length African-American novel was published in England. It was written by William Wells Brown and was titled Clotel, or the President's Daughter. Clotel was, in the novel, was the daughter of Thomas Jefferson and one of his slave mistresses, and it was a novel that blurred fact and fiction, because so much of Clotel was modeled on true person and true events. But this story of Clotel helped popularize the image of the tragic mulatta that was prevalent or became prevalent in American fiction and drama. But the ultimate outcome, in which Clotel transforms herself into a combative trickster figure to rescue her daughter from slavery, tests the limits of gender conventions in fiction. We're going to see Martin R. Delaney again. In 1859, he published Blake, or the Huts of America. And in this story, Blake became the first Black nationalist culture hero in African American literature. This period also saw the emergence of the first African American women's fiction. We have The Two Offers by Frances Ellen Watkins Harper and Our Nig, or Sketches from the Life of a Free Black by Harriet E. Wilson. The Renaissance in African American literature brought us into the time of the Civil War and emancipation. In 1860, Republican candidate for president Abraham Lincoln was elected in one of the bitterest campaigns ever waged in the U.S. He was the first avowedly anti-slavery candidate, yet he promised the South that he wouldn't demand the abolition of slavery, and at the same time he affirmed that he wouldn't allow secessionists to split the Union. So on April 12, 1861, when South Carolina bombarded federal troops at Fort Sumter, Lincoln called for 75,000 troops to put down the Southern Rebellion, which turned into the Civil War that raged on for 4 years. Early in the Civil War, participation by African Americans, free blacks in the North, was very limited. Lincoln was not in favor of allowing free blacks into the army or any branch of the military. until the summer of 1862, when finally, upon the advice of Frederick Douglass and other trusted advisors, he allowed free blacks in liberated portions of Louisiana and South Carolina to form their own regiments. These regiments proved their worth in March 1863, when a regiment of free blacks and former slaves captured and occupied Jacksonville, Florida. At that time, Lincoln decided on a full-scale recruitment of blacks into the armed forces. By the end of the Civil War, more than 186,000 blacks had served in artillery, cavalry, engineers, and infantry, as well as in the U.S. Navy. More than 38,000 blacks gave their lives for the Union. While the whites had many reasons for engaging in the Civil War, for fighting for the North, for the Union, blacks had one overriding purpose, and that was to end slavery. From the beginning of the war, they waited for about 2 years for Lincoln to link the war to slavery, because it was, in Lincoln's mind, primarily about secessionism and stopping the secessionists from leaving the Union, from splitting the Union. But in the summer of 1862, he issued the Emancipation Proclamation. And in the Emancipation Proclamation, he declared all slaves in the South would be free as of the 1st of January, 1863. And blacks in the North felt that finally their country had committed itself to an ideal worth dying for. Ah, what a grand, glorious day this has been! The dawn of freedom which it heralds may not break upon us at once, but it will surely come, and sooner, I believe, than we have ever dared hope before. These are the words of Charlotte Fortin, who was the daughter of a prominent and influential activist, civil rights activist, and author from Philadelphia. On April 9th, 1865, in Appomattox, Virginia, the Southern Army finally surrendered. And then on the 6th, abolished slavery and involuntary servitude throughout the country. But the long-anticipated era of freedom, equality, and opportunity for all would prove much more difficult to bring into reality.